Never mind. I will start recording now. Sorry. So next step 2 is that we want to change the value of the input box, which is we actually want to do something, right? In that sense, after we select this ID equals input, we're going to change its values, right? In that sense, it is better. And it is very common because in native JS, if we want to do this, we need to like have a lot of lines to first select that things and then do something. It will have multiple lines, but in jQuery, you can actually do this in the one take, which means you can write multiple functions, multiple methods in the same line, which is it's good to have, right? The same space, but it just sometimes in many cases it reduces the readability. But if you like an experienced user, you need to make yourself more, I would say, familiar with this style because it's very convenient, right? We'll actually talk about this later. It's called the functions chainings, which means you can actually attach different functions after one another so that it will save space, right? And we are going to add, for example, like add an event to a button, and when the user click on it, show a text. This is very common behavior, right? And for jQueries, a very important feature is that we want to make a request. So we sometimes cannot store everything in our codes, right? That's impossible. And sometimes that's not even secure at all because, for example, like if you have like a sensitive data, you definitely do not want to store directly into your web pages, right? So that's why we need to store your data into somewhere else and then make a request to get this data into your the browsers, right? So to do this, we use this function called get. So this get function is in the jQuery functions to get the data, right? So it has two parameters. The first parameter is called is URLs, right? It's literally like where this data is, right? The online data sets URLs. And the second parameter is callback, which is a function basically that tells you what you will do to this data if data is available, right? So basically in this function, you define what you're going to do with this return parameter. So this parameter indicates the data to be returned by this get function. So in that sense, it's like there was really, I would say this kind of intuitive because JS do not procrastinate, right? Just unlike us, right? We always make, okay, we can do this later, but jQuery and JS do not like that. So that basically means that if you want to get some things, you need to indicate what you're going to do with these things, right? And that's why it's called callback. In that sense, you need to define what you're going to do, which is these functions once it's returned. That's the idea. And the next part, of course, we talk a lot about muscles and senses. And the next part, we're going to go for the beauty parts, right? CSS is the ones, right? We want to make some layouts. We want to play with the colors, right? So CSS full name is cascading style sheets. So first, they can manipulate the layout, for example, the position, sequence of the HTML elements, like the page, right? The layouts. And the color and fonts, these one are most important, I would say, because right now, nowadays, the colors and the fonts are more important than anything else, right? And for example, I show you example here. First, you can see these two systems are same as the jQueries, right? It's actually jQuery borrowed from a CSS, but we just introduced the jQuery in the first. But the idea is that when you want to select something with ID, you want to use hashtag. Whenever you want to select the class name, you want to use dot, right? In that sense, for this specific object we want to change is width to 25 pixels. And for this object, these like a bunch of object, which is a class, want to change its padding to 4 pixels. And remember this, you can actually change the feature in the specific directions, which means there's like 4 directions, right? Like a top, down, left, and right, right? You can actually choose one direction to that, right? And of course, there was other things like change the border styles, change transition styles. These are the very common ways. But however, I do not recommend for you to do that because CSS seems like travels, right? It seems like optional, but I do not actually want you to do that because it requires more work and it's more complicated than you imagine. So just like a makeup by for professional, do not try this at home because it will sabotage everything. So instead, I want to suggest to you that unless absolutely necessary, like something that you notice wrong in your pages, you do not want to like do that on your own, okay? Instead, you want to try some framework and library. That's a more efficient way to do this. For example, like Bootstraps, this one, the most famous one, the Twitters are using this. They're using a very clean and a very well-defined, well-designed styles so that it can render layouts and define different simple styles very efficiently, right? And the second is the font awesome. This one is actually my favorite one because it will provide very free and basically free vector icons and logos, and they will provide different SVGs and the different vectors, art styles that you don't have to like download that at all. So you can just use that directly. But anyways, let's go for our summaries, right? So as we talked before, HTML is like a bones, right? It's a foundation of a website. And the JS is a muscle and senses. We can see things, we can do some things, right? It's like action and reaction. Like CSS is a makeup. So it's like layout and styles, right? And these threes, we want to combine them, right? So that's why we are combining threes, right? We need to include JS and CSS file and libraries to our main HTMLs to make them work. So that's why we use for JS, we use these ones. You don't have to understand what is that way because I don't understand. But you need to like, one thing you need to notice that you will need to change these values, which is like a location of your scripts, right? You need to make sure that it is the right positions so that you can incorporate it correctly, right? And the CSS, like similar styles, similar things, like you need to change the location of theirs so that you can incorporate that correctly. And finally, most important is that you want to make sure adding your main JS and CS after other libraries. For example, the Leaflet and the jQuery, we will talk about Leaflet later, is that you want to make sure when you are writing some things, these libraries are already added to your HTMLs, right? That's very, very common like a mistake made by the newcomers, because a lot of people just like to, I wrote these things, it should be in the number ones, right? I make that mistake. So in that sense, it does not make it works because the library is after what it writes. All right. So next part we want to talk about is the web browser. So web browser, I guess everyone uses web browser. If you can make it here, I guess you are like a proficient web browser users, right? So, but however, do you know that how web browser works, right? So essentially, it is software that translates online HTMLs, JS, CSS codes into contents that you can see, right? So, like a debug, there is like besides the things you usually see, is there is a debug window that we developer care more, which means you can actually see what's in the backside, right? What's in the backgrounds. In that sense, it's like a place, right? You want to go inside. Of course, you can just see the front end, but not front end, just the appearance. But if you go inside, you can actually see, whoa, what's this, right? It seems so ugly. But in that sense, this is what it really is. It is like the inner part of that. And we're going to use this feature a lot if you want to later use write your own map services and the maps like web maps, right? We all actually use this feature a lot. The first we need to see is different tabs, right? Different tabs have different function. The first we have inspector, basically that shows elements in current HTMLs. And this feature, which is, I don't know what its names, but it's like a little icons that usually most browser have, that you can actually pick elements on page and show HTML codes. In that sense, for example, like this website, if you, let's say these buttons, right? You can actually, after click on this, you can click on that and it will automatically drag your attention in this inspector to the corresponding codes, that parts, right? And finally, I think this is I would say when I was a starter, nobody told me, but I figured out by myself. But I wish this one is something that could tell me, is that the current HTML you're seeing in this page may be very different from the original HTML file you wrote, because your JS file will add and change your contents later. And do not panic when you see, okay, why this difference, right? Because that's literally how JS works. It literally manipulates your HTML contents on your web pages so that it can see more, right? And that's the reason we use JS, because we do not want to roll these like large, ugly chunk of a codes, HTML codes by ourselves, right? That's a reason. And next, we can see next to the inspector, we have a consoles, right? Console is very similar to like the ones you see in the Pythons, right? And the R's, right? You know the R's, especially the R's, they have the consoles, right? So this is like the JavaScript console for the current page. You will notice that there is a function. This function will be used a lot because it's equivalent to the print in Python and R. So it will it's very useful to show the information that you want to see, right? For example, like here, in the example in the first lines, I will show console.log first lines, and after you refresh your page and save your changes, you will actually see here in the console, it will show that. It will say, okay, this is successfully executed, right? And it's very useful for simple debug, especially for newcomers. So I would say it is very nice to have, but if you want to go deeper, you want to learn more about debug buttons, these are more for advanced users. But for now, you can just live with the console.log, which is very common, right? So you can actually change this one. You can actually try this one at any page, like Google's, right? The documents, the bodies, the inner HTML equals nothings. Let's see what happens, okay? And finally, this is like the so-called advanced knowledge, but I think I really hope someone could tell me about this and explain it in a plain language when I was a newcomer. So I will explain this to you, even though it's kind of advanced, but it's still relevant, and we actually play with this feature a lot in this lab. Is that there is a course restrictions, which the full name is cross-origin resource sharing. It's a rule that website usually cannot request the resources from other domains, right? So for example, like what if we have AAA.coms and this website cannot directly request the CSV file hosted on the bbb.com. Unless bbb.com server explicitly say so. I say, okay, I trust this guy, I trust this AAA.coms, and you can request the files from me, right? And this is hold true, even if it is a public file, which means if bbb.com do not explicitly so, AA.com can request the files from this. Even if you can directly access these public files, AA.com cannot request that directly from this part. This is, I would say, use analogy. So it's just like borrowing money, right? I have two friends, A and B's, right? I can borrow money from A, I can borrow money from B's, right? But I cannot actually ask A to borrow money in the name of me to B's, right? That's fishy, right? That's weird. And if you think about that, this is making sense because not only this is such a weird situation, but also it is so insecure for both parties, is that I don't know who you are and you are requesting my files, and for another person, what if this is a virus, right? What if this is some malwares and nobody knows, right? So in that sense, based on these rationales, most web browsers just ban this request unless your website, your target website, which is bbb.com, explicitly says, so, okay, I trust this A.com's guys. So usually what we have, the situation we have here is that AA.com can only request the resources from AA.com's domain, which is like AA.com file.csv. That's like the common practice we have right now. But guess what? If you are Google, that's all right. Maybe a lot of websites will add you as a trusted user, but we as nobody on the internet, nobody will trust us, right? It's like literally a jungles, right? So that's why we're going to, for our local development purposes, again, this is just for local development. The development is that first you want to start a local server. In that sense, everything will happen in the local host. That's the one thing, but that's kind of complicated. So that's why we use a Firefox Developer Edition and of course Everywhere plugin. That's the reason I ask you to install this, because so Firefox have a different version. So Developer Edition can actually like bypass some things if you tell them to, so right. And I think in 2017 they changed this rule so that every browser now follow strictly the course restriction. And after the 2017, I think there was a like little short window that when normal Firefox can still request this from somewhere, which means you can actually do this still. But anyway, it's right now, so we just use a Firefox developer edition to finish the requestings, because sometimes we have to make some testing on local side, and local side somehow is regarded as a different domains from anywhere, right? Nobody will trust the local files. So finally we made it. Thank you. We made it. Okay, we made it to mapping libraries. We talked so many basic stuff that we spent like 30 minutes about this, but we have been here, right? So the mapping libraries we want to use in JavaScript environment is called Leaflet. So Leaflet is a very useful JavaScript libraries, and it is open source actually to support mapping. So what do you mean by open source? That's free, right? We don't like costing money. So to add this library, you don't actually have to understand all of these codes. The only thing you need to understand is that Leaflet is actually have two parts, which is leaflet.js and leaflet.css. Right. So basically just to copy this one. So usually these links are usually provided by providers, which is can be either a CDN, which is like a place that hosts these libraries, or directly from the official Leaflet like servers. They can actually provide these online libraries that from their servers, right? So usually you don't have to understand these others. Usually you have the place, you can just click buttons and they copy this. And the one thing you want to do is just add this one to your own HTML files before your main JS files, of course. And just like a jQuery's $, leaflet function starts with else, right? Because they leaflets, right? So let's see an example here, right? So for example, I add a map object to HTML elements with ID equals map ID. So since we want to, HTML is like the bones, right? It's like a foundation of web map. And we want to, first is that to have a container in the HTML files. And then in the leaflet, which is the JavaScript environment, we want to add a map element to these HTML elements, which is a container, to produce a map. So that is what I'm going to do. So here, this is the code. I like to break things down. So first, we have a variables, right? We define this myMap variable, which will be our future JS leaflet map. And what is this, right? What is this myMap things, right? We define it as with the leaflets to create the map functions, which is like the function to create a leaflet map elements, right? So where did it create it in? So this is a parameter you need to add to this code so that it can say, okay, this is my target HTML elements ID, whose ID is map IDs, right? Now until here, this is actually the end of the creations of the leaflets, map elements in the JavaScript environment. This is all. But however, there is another functions here that we can actually directly set the maps to a specific views after the direct creations of these elements. So here we use two parameters here. So first, the parameter is actually list, which is like two elements, right? Two items in a list, which is the views and lat long. Remember, this is lat long. So lat, which is the latitudes, which is the y in the. I know this is the y-axis, kind of weird, but it's a practice, right? Common practice. And the next parameter will be the zoom level, which means how close you want to zoom in, right? So after determining where your center of your views and which is your zoom level, you can actually specify windows that you can see from. Depending on, of course, you can change its values to zoom into different places, right? So I would talk about generally about how leaflet function is formalized, because I think it is very important. So all elements first, after different creations, of course, we use, for example, like L.circles, right? These functions are like the function to create these elements, right? After these elements, it must add to myMap to show on the maps, because even if we created, it's still living in the limbos, right? You can imagine as living limbos, right? But if you want to see that on your map, you need to literally like manually and specifically add that to the myMap so that you can see that, right? And for example, there were several items we usually use, for example, like layers, like a raster layers, or tile layers, like vector layers, different things, right? These things are like a collection of symbology that provided by Leaflet natively that you can actually directly add into that. There is other single symbologies like the circles, the circle marker, which I will talk about later. They are different things. And the polygons or markers are different things. These are like a symbology, simple symbologies, right? And also we have other like information medias like a pop-art, right? This is literally like a box on the maps that to tell you different useful information, right? So next we want to talk about is this general structure, which is the so-called logic of the function, how they are written, right? I think this is very nice to write because there is really nowhere to find this information, but just from my knowledge that I can summarize all of the leaflet function I know of is that first they usually start with L, that's obvious, and start with the functions, but within this function they usually have several parameters, right? So first 2 or 1 or 3, depending on how many necessary parameters you take, is so-called important parameters. So in that sense, it could be A, B, C. So in that sense, these functions can have a lot of parameters as long as they are important parameters. So in that sense, if you are necessary parameters, these parameters will be listed as a separate parameter in these functions. For example, like circle here, because a circle, you can imagine they have the 2 parameter determine its location, which is first is the centroid, right? And second is radius, right? To determine these 2 parameters, you need to literally add 2 parameters here. So that's why we can have important parameters as itself. And the finally ones is usually written as a single parameters, which is a large chunk of structure of the different parameters written in something like this, which is the key value pairs. So these parameters are called the optional parameters, usually about the styles, color, few colors, or a few opacities. These parameters about so-called the not very important ones in terms like how to define itself, right? But these are actually very useful practically, but in terms like how to create this function, it does not necessarily need that. So, so usually the last one is a large, is usually defined by the curly bracket that define the large chunk of parameters. So yeah, this is like how Leaflet language is written and how they formulate these functions. And here we can have show example of a tile layer. So this one actually, let's look at the first part. This large chunk of functions are basically they tell you to create a tile layers, basically to show you on the maps, which is the base layer we see here. So this is actually the OSM maps created by the maintained by Mapbox. And we are going to actually use the same layers here, right? And of course, after the creation of this layer, you need to add to the map to actually show that, right? So this is pretty much like a working web maps, right? You can play with that. There's actually the working buttons. You can zoom in, zoom out, right? This is, yeah, this is pretty like the working example. But however, this is a local version, which means we need to consider how to make it online, right? We always make it online. So there are several solutions to host a website. First, of course, you can, if you have money or fundings, you can borrow or buy a server. So in that sense, it is more luxury and or premium solutions, right? It's a server. You can imagine as an online computer that runs like 24/7, right? It always working. And it can support a backend and like a database or more APIs and more actions, right? Which means it's more dynamic. But however, since we are just making a static map, which means it does not have a backend, we can just use the GitHub pages to host that. So GitHub pages is very nice feature. Is that the GitHub, this website, it can support this website without a backend, which means it is free and persistent. As long as GitHub is there, which is have very low risk of failings, you can visit that. My personal website is built on this feature. So yeah, it is working and it's free. So and go to this, and I think most of you already do this. So after you do this, you should be able to see a demo here, which will be the exactly same demo we'll be doing in the labs. So it'll be the same as, yeah, so the same ideas. So now, before we using that, I kind of want to give you touches of the knowledge of a Git. What is a Git? What is a GitHub, right? So GitHub and Git are two different things, just like they're kind of like brand names, right? The Git is like a version control software, so you just record your every committed changes, and the GitHub is a website that can record your changes to an online server so that you can, get and retrieve and update in your servers, right? And also it can, of course, host a static web page, which is the reason we use it. And to make your change effective on the online map, you need to first commit, which means you record your current changes to local, which means that you basically commit your changes to Git, right? And then you're going to push, which means you upload your files to GitHub server. And after you upload your files to GitHub server, in a few minutes, the page will update your changes according to your changes, right? This is like a kind of a natural. It's just like I always use GitHub as the version control. I think this is not just limited to web programming, because it's really nice feature that you can do. And there's a lot of possibilities here, like even your manuscription, like manuscripts, right? Like written a paper, and after you commit and it records your changes, you can actually, one thing you can do is you can compare different changes you made, or you can go back to see what you wrote before. And I think that's good for my writing, because I can actually compare to how bad I am. But anyway, we now reach the end of this lecture. So I know that's a long time, but I had very nice time control. But you know what, before we go into that, we want to make sure everyone is at the same page. So so if you still haven't installed all the prerequisites, we can either you can just wait for me, and or you can just listen it and watch later about the recordings, right? Because we already record a lot of that. And the goals basically of these labs is we want to reproduce the demos we made on your repos, right? And we're going to host the updated web pages and see everything, right? Gradually, I want to guide you thoroughly through this process. And if you have any question about the lectures, now is the time to bring up, right? So before we want to go into that, we want to open up these instructions here. I think it is in your repos. You can use your own repos, which should be exactly the same as mine so far. Okay, I see some chat. Yes, yeah, thank you, Brian. So yes, let's do some labs, right? Let's do some lab. So one thing I want you to do is that first is, of course, let's go to the repo, which is here, right? You can see there is actually I pretty much write everything is in this in these web pages, and you can follow this or you can follow me, right? It's all right. And next thing you want to do is that I want to open your GitHub desktops, right? Make sure you see the same as mine. And two things you want to do, right? The first thing is want to open an Explorer. Basically, that's like a Windows like here, right? You should be seeing the same as mine. That's all right. So I'm using a second account, so I'm not using my Louis Liu account. So in essence, I'm doing exactly with you. I'm actually starting the exact things with you. So don't worry about I'm doing different things, right? We're literally at the same page. And the next things we want to do is we want to click on the open the Visual Studio Code, and that should be opening up. Yes, it should be up. Open up this. Okay, so now we should be seeing this page. Let's move.
Sorry, Leo, where was that that link, the Open Visual Studio link? That wasn't in the GitHub, was it?
Do you mean the where to download that, or?
Oh, never mind. I have it open. I'm
Okay.
good. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so there is a button on the desktop that says open in Visual Studio. Basically, that's just open the folders you clone your repos into, right? Local repos. So you should be seeing the same as mine. So the API, code, data, demo, doc. The things we really care about is the first three is API, code, and data. So the working environment we'll be in is actually in the code. So you will notice that there is only a license file. It's all right. We'll populate that. So one thing I like to do is like to do this side by side so that we can see this all together. Right? We can do this side by side, and it's very nice to have, right? So let's first go to the Frontend Lab instructions. So make sure you open that, these two buttons to see the exactly same as I, okay? The first thing we want to do is to create files. We talk about how HTML is like the bones of the web pages, right? So first we want to create the bones, right? So first we want to create, let's right click on the code folders. Let's click on new files. You can name something else, but I will go with index.html because index.html is actually a default names for the HTML files, because the GitHub pages actually can automatically attract and detect these index.htmls, and so that you don't have to like manually enter a web pages after you created that. So click on anywhere, it should be creating index.html. This should be empty. That's totally fine. So next we want to do is that we want to first is add HTML tag to indicate this is indeed HTML files, right? So you can either type, I will type just for once. So yeah, this is pretty much like it. They will automatically connect, like automatically corrected and completed your your HTMLs, right? This is a very nice feature if you want to like automatically achieve a lot of things, right? I like this, but sometimes it just don't work because I like to skip to another thing. So many times it just sabotage my things. But anyway, now here's next part. We want to now talk about the general structures of most HTML files. So usually what we have is that we have a head and we have a body section. So it's just like humans, right? And the head section usually defines different libraries, like the ones we talk about, jQuery, Leaflets, and many other important settings and the metadata, right? And the body parts, however, is the actual part most of the HTML elements will be in, basically what we see on the page, right? So before everything, we want to either copy or type this text, this two tag, which represent in these two major sections, right? There's a very common feature in the GitHub, which is the page I'm seeing, is that you can actually click on this button, little button, to directly copy the codes, right? And by the way, I want to talk about this actually, is that in these open source domains, there is really no shame for copying things. I actually encourage you to copy things. That's no shame. I say this aloud. I copy a lot of things. I hate writing things by myself. I love cheating. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm coming off closet. That's really a good thing to have. If you're talking about academic integrities, it does not apply to these domains, okay? Because as we talk about in the title is that we care about productivities, right? We want to teach you how to make productive maps, not original maps, right? Of course, you can say, I want to add original parts into this part, but that's afterwards. I want you to formalize with all of these things in the first-hand experience. But a lot of times, what we want to do is that we really do not want to type in a lot of things because there were several reasons. One is that is not efficient. Two, you will make mistakes when typing things. I make a mistake, I know that. And this really makes no sense if we can do this more efficiently, right? So that's enough talking, let's copy that. And now we would notice that we have two parts, right? So now basically this is empty HTML files. Let's save that. To save these files, you can press on Control+S. This is like the common instructions in your like anything is, right? I save that. As you can see, this little round button is gone. So that means your savings, there is no unsaved changes, right? Make sure you don't see that little buttons over there. Right. So next part we're going to create is the JavaScript and the CSS, right? Let's do the same things. So right click on in the new files, let's say you can actually name another like a files names, right? But I will go with the main.js and style.css. And you will notice that it's empty, of course, it's empty. So after doing this, we can just close this one so that we can focus on this like these three files, right? So close this getting started window because it's kind of annoying. So next part we're going to do is that we go first is populate the HTML because HTML will be the foundations, right? So first, of course, we have the head and the bodies, right? In the head part, we have first is the metadata, several metadata. So let's copy these ones into our head part. Let's click on this button and copy that in the head section. So no, you'll notice that this kind of a misaligned. That's all right. One thing you can do is that you can right click on anywhere in this document and click on format documents. Now everything is aligned. This is very, very convenient features. Or you can just press on Shift plus Control, Shift plus Alt plus F. This is like the shortcut for these things. Make sure you save, and of course you want to change your names, right? The insurer names. My name is Louis Liu, so I would change, but this is definitely not my first, so I would just say not my first web map. You can just say your first depending on your scenarios. And the rest of them are basically just some metadata is usually just that we either copy or we borrow from another places. So basically that's telling you compatibility issues in different OS's browsers, right? Like Apple's, like IE Edges, that's all right. So one thing you want to change is the description, which and also the authors. You can change your names. And your description, you can just copy your title into that part. Anyone have any questions so far? Okay, that's good to know. So so basically this is very simple, but the next part we're going to insert the libraries, right? So these again, I talk about how you can find these links in the CDNs or any website they provided use. So basically that's again some copies, right? And also the jQueries. Basically this is like a two library we're going to use in this project. And also remember to Shift Alt plus F to make it more beautiful, right? All right, so this is basically the hash section because we just use these two libraries. We just add these tools. But of course, if you want to like having more libraries or more functions, you always welcome to add your own. But make sure you don't have like some contradictions, and also make sure that you maintains your codes more cleanly, because sometimes my practice is that I want to merge JS with JS and the CSS with CSS, right? That's like how I do that, but you can do you, okay? And next part we're going to actually do is the body section. We know that body section is actually the things we see on the web pages, right? So that's why since we just want to make a web maps, right? Which is literally just the whole page is a web map. So that's why we're going to add these lines here to our codes. You can type or I like copy, so that's more efficient. So let's break it down, okay? I know this is kind of long, but anyway, first is I would notice is a divs, right? Div is very common HTML elements we'll see a lot. You can imagine it's a containers, right? I don't want to explain a lot, but you can imagine as a container that literally satisfy like what we need out of the leaflets, right? Because we want the leaflet to fill a container on the map, on the pages, so that it become a map, right? And then it should have an ID so that we can find these elements in the leaflet condition, in leaflet environments, right? And here that's basically it. And this style tag is essentially a CSS CSS settings, right? So you notice that this is actually very similar to what we talked on the mini lectures, is that these are styles, right? Like a layout and the length. But of course you can say, I want to write this in the CSS. That's one way to do that, which is actually, actually recommended, because this is kind of hard to maintain. And sometimes if you have so many elements inside the same pages, you will perhaps just forget there is like a style here. So you never find out, okay, why is my style.js CSS is empty while my style is changing, right? That's because maybe there's like a style settings over there, which is equivalent to the CSS settings, right? But for this project, we just stay this way so that it's more clean, and we don't have to touch that style.css, right? So now we said this is basically the only container we need on the page. Of course, you can have more complicated things, but that is not the purpose of the class. So next is that we want to connect these three files together, right? Although these two files is still empty, but we will make it, we will populate that. So these two are literally the same sentences we have in the labs, in the mini lectures we see on the PowerPoints. So so let's add it to the bottom of the bodies, so that it can to make sure it is always the last one to add it. By the way, there is really a huge difference if you want to add something in the head or bodies. They just a loose, I would say, practice that we have in the HTMLs. We want to do this. So if you want to insert the library here in the bodies instead of the head, that's all right. So yes. So yes, this is pretty much what we have in the index. We can actually already open this. Although there's nothing here, let's go to the ones you open up in the Windows. Let's see. Let's open up the code folder. Now you can see this is 3 files we created in the Visual Studio Codes, because we're literally looking at the same places, right? It's just in different windows, right? Now here, as you can see, there's the index.html. That's double click on that, or I can drag that into my browser to see what it's like. You can see, it can already see that the title is changing, right? You can see the title is here, it's like a not first map made by me, which is here, right? Although the rest of them is still nothing, but that's all right, because we haven't filled the containers of these containers, right? So next part we're going to do, let's go back to instructions. So next part, we're actually going to write the JavaScript codes. So which most of them will be leaflet codes. So first we want to do is, we talk about the JavaScript is like a muscle and senses. So first we want to do is first create a mind map, which is the same things we talk about in the lectures, right? So after you copy this, I set this to the center of the Americas. So and with a very, I would say, small scales in terms the scales, right? And when we talk about in the cartography, and it's zoom very large, right? So that we can see the totality of the North Americas, right? Let's save this, and you should already can see a maps, like a framework already. So let's refresh this page. You can see this is almost like a maps, right? You can already see like a toggle buttons, right? Like a zoom in, zoom out. Although there is still nothing here, but this is already a web map, and this is already a functional, directly functional web maps framework. As you can see, this is very simple, very flexible, and I love this. I absolutely love this because it is very newcomer friendly, right? And since we definitely do not want that to be the limbo forever, right? We want to add something. So that's why we need to add these Mapbox OSM base layers, right? So one thing we need to do is that we copy this one, and let's see that. After let's see what happens, and then I will explain why it looks that way, okay? Save this main.js. Let's go to the pages and refresh that. So this is practically a pretty much working web maps, right? This is like you can already toggle, you can already see where it's at, and this is very fantastic, isn't it? So there's like basically no efforts to make it work. But anyway, so let's break it down. Okay, let's break it down these large functions here. So a lot of these times you don't actually have to understand how it works, especially for the base layer, because you will never change it anyways. So there were several like a very important, I would say, kind of important parameters you want to understand, which is here, which is the maximum. Maximum basically tell you how far you can zoom into, right? So now I set to the 18, we can set to we can actually set to like something very ridiculous small, so like 6. Let's see how it does. So you can see this is the maximum amount. I cannot zoom in at all, sorry. So like here, the button is the cancel, the basically how far you can zoom in, right? Let's go back to the 18 so that we can keep it normal, right? And also there was a ID, the attribution, basically you can, this is like the little, this information that shows on the maps. I recommend it to stay that way because a lot of times when you want to use these maps, you actually like make a kind of agreements, like not necessarily like a contract, but agreement that you are kind of acknowledging the efforts that these base layers, like the producers, like their efforts, right? You want to acknowledge that. And that is a very nice practice because we always want to make sure that people get credit, right? Although we talk a lot about like copyings, but one thing you need to remember is that you need to make sure that the things you're copying is okay to copy, right? To know this, you want to see several things. So one thing is you either can contact the person, right, to know, okay, is this okay for me to copy your work? If you say so, that's all right. And most of the times you don't have to copy them because there is a very, very nice feature in here. So let's go. You don't have to move here. I'll just show you. So here, you see there is an MIT license. So this license basically says, this is open source. You can copy everything. You can do commercial use even. You can actually make modifications on the codes. But I don't have the liability and the warranty of your work. Basically, if you have any trouble, nothing wrong with me. Okay. And however, there is a license and copyright notice, which means you need to address me in your work. So in essence, yeah, just as long as you see like this license or most of the license you see on the GitHub, that's usually okay to copy. So as long as it's addressed, this is kind of like a tricky questions and more common question. We won't actually go deep, but just to know, okay? Let's go back to here. Okay, so we just produce the layers here and add it to my map. Remember, creating a thing is not enough in Leaflet. You need to literally add to a map, right? And so right now we just have a working layers, right? We can toggle, we can zoom in, we can pans. And next thing we want to do is want to add 3 basic symbologies, right? We talk about the basic, like the logic of the the leaflet symbologies, right? First, you need to use Eldor marker, for example, and then you need to add the necessary parameters, which are usually defined explicitly and separately in the functions, right? And after you define these ones, you need to add it to your maps. So let's just copy that and see what happens, right? And remember save, or you won't be able to see the changes. So go to the web pages and refresh that. You can see, okay, there's a marker here, and it will automatically open up a pop-up on the maps. So we talk about here, we add it to the maps, and then we can actually directly bind a pop-up, which is like information medias, onto this symbology, so that it says, hello world, I am a long pop-ups, right? And also directly after you bind this pop-up, you can directly open that on the maps. In essence, it's called a method or a function chaining. In that sense, it is immediately after your creation, you can actually add another methods so that you can directly code that, which is a very, very common way of coding functions. But a lot of the time people find it very troublesome. So there is one thing you can do, okay? For example, I can do is var. You don't have to like type as this because it literally is the same thing. I just show you another way of doing this. So marker, I can do marker equals algorithm markers, right? I can just separate these ones, right? Marker dot add to maps, right? And marker dot bind pop-ups, which is you bind a pop-up to these markers, right? And because you want to name this pop-up, and then you're going to pop-up, which is open this pop-up you created. So let's save and see what happens. I think this should be the same. Yeah, it should be the same. In that sense, although you can see you wrote a lot of things and you define a lot of like useless, I would say just the one-time variables, but you don't really achieve a better performance. In that sense, this is the exactly reason why we use the so-called function chaining, and a lot of people like this because it's more efficient. It saves your times, right? All right, let's make it all the ways, right? Let's make it more efficient. All right. So this is exactly the same as the ones we see here, okay? So next part, so after we define a marker, we want to do more things like a polygon and circles, right? Let's do polygons and circles. These two are like the shapes on the maps, right? So marker, let me explain the difference between marker and the shapes, right? Marker is literally a markers, right? It's just these sizes does not matters. A size is literally always the same whenever you're zooming in. We can see this on the maps, right? Even if you zoom very closely, it will still stay the same. So in that sense, the size does not matter at all. But however, the ones we are going to add it will actually matter, which means it will stay, the distance in the real times the same. So even if you zoom in and zoom out, we actually see the difference, right? The first we want to do is copy this chunk of codes into this. Let's save that, and first let's see the behavior. Well, what is the difference between the two things, right? So notice that there was like a triangle here and the circle here, right? There was also a pop-up binding to this these two shapes, right? So we can zoom in and see how it looks like, right? Notice that if you zoom in, this marker will stay as not physically, like visually the same, right? However, for this one, if you zoom in, visually it will become larger and physically will stay in the same size, right? So in that sense, these two, although they are looking the same, kind of similar, this one is actually a circle on the ground, right? So that's a difference. And so I will explain why this looks that way. So first, it's like very similar to the same logic as we talk in the mini lectures. You need to define circles, right? What is a circle? Circle need two parameters, right? Remember, the centroid and the radius, right? And finally, we need a so-called optional parameter defined, like the color, few colors, few opacity. You can actually define opacity, like borders, a lot of like even like shades, right? Shadows. And a lot of these are like you can actually go to the documentation and look it up. There's a lot of options you can do. And after you create these features, then you can add it to my map, which is what it shows. We can actually try to how to, like, what if we don't add it at all? So yeah, it's gone, right? So yeah, you can actually play with it a little bit. And then we're going to buy the pop-up. Say I'm a long circle. So let's see. So notice that it does not automatically show up because we do not call this function, which is open pop-up on directly. So in that sense, although it is not open up, you can still open that by clicking on it later. So it's all right. It's just like a tribal difference. Like a polygon here is the polygon, it has a one parameters, which is necessary. These parameters is actually a list. Okay, I have a chat. Okay, never mind. Oh, thank you. So so polygon is basically like a list, right? They have 3 points. So that's why it's a triangles, right? So we can see these triangles, right? And that's basically the ideas. But one thing we notice that is very efficient because we literally like manually, add every one of these, right? It's not efficient at all. So that's why we need to consider a more efficient way, which means that like more collective ways to add these symbologies, right? And that's why we're using a GeoJSON layers. So the first that we want to prepare a data set. So of course, I think all of you should be able to use your like a data sets right now. So to do that, you want to use this link of theirs. So for mine, let's copy this and test it by myself. So here, remember to change your names here to your, in my case, is my usernames, right? So you should be seeing something like this, right? So this is actually a GeoJSON file. So although it looks like a code, it does not necessarily show a shape, but this is actually, we can actually directly visualize this code onto our map to show that. How to do that, right? That's our issues. So this is the code for using the data, right? Let's first copy a lot of these and then break it down a little bit. So to do that, we need to and save that. Let's go to and see what happens, right? All right, so you should be seeing the same as mice. If you see a different behavior, just tell me, okay? If you see nothing, so that should be something that make sure you save or make sure you open up your GitHub pages so that you can. So yeah, that's basically the idea. So after you see this, so just to give you some context, this is actually the UFO witness in the North America in 2019 in March, right? This is 1 month of data. So this is very, very interesting data, I would say. So a lot of people actually using this data for machine learning. So believe it or not, this is actually a legit work. But anyway, so I want to explain a little bit and the context of this, why this code will work. So first, we want to to see that, review the get, right? We talk a lot about the get in our lectures. So the get is in the jQuery. So notice a dollar signs, right? The jQuery function get will have two parameters, right? First parameter, of course, is our I will change this to my second account so that it won't be troublesome later. So yes, make sure you add this one, and make sure, yeah, do not directly use my data sets, because that's we're talking in the course is in a different domain. So change this one to your your own repos, because even if you can see right now it's in the local version, it maybe you cannot see that later if you make it online, right? That's kind of a troublesome. So make sure you do this, okay? So as we talked about before, the first parameter is the URL, basically physically where is that, right? And where did you get this data from, right? And next part we talk about, the JS do not like procrastinating, right? So you need to immediately indicate what you're going to do with this data. So this is why we're going to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, which is visualize GeoJSONs, which is functions define layers, right? Inside these functions, this is what we haven't touched yet. So we're going to break it down. So first, what we do is that we define a GeoJSON layers, which is defined by l.geojsons. So this is actually a layers, right? And this layer can use the GeoJSON data you retrieved from these places and visualize on the maps. So yeah, this is kind of intuitive, right? The first parameter, of course, is the data, right? Which is get from that places in the here, right? So we see in the codes, right? And then inside these so-called optional structures, there's one parameter we need to point, which is so-called point to layers. So what is point layers, right? So this is a functions that these GeoJSONs, these functions needs to convert each point in these data sets to different symbologies, right? Because as you imagine, this data is data, right? It does not contain any symbology information, just like the ones we have the ArcGIS or QGIS, right? They do not necessarily have the symbology information. In that sense, we need to tell these GeoJSON layers that how do you want me to visualize that in different symbologies, right? So now we have these functions, which is literally the roles that we set and tell the machine that, okay, this is the way you want to do the transformations, right? So these functions have two parameters, right? So by the way, this is like a predefined. So you can find this by reading documentation or other people's code, but there is really no easy way to understand or to know this beforehand. So and as I told you right now, right? So I have two functions parameters, which the first one is a feature, is like the attributes table. and let long, which is the locations, like the points, right? And this function would directly return a symbology. So this is a symbology, right? So basically it is defined as l.circle.marker. So this is essentially a marker. We actually revisit later, like what's the difference between a circle and a circle marker. But you can see this is like the same ideas, right? It has a lat long, and it has a radius. It has different optional parameters which define its styles. The idea is that so for every point in these GeoJSON layers, after you define these every point to a symbology on the maps. That's why we see here that's every point is here, right? And I want to talk a little bit about the difference of right? So this one is actually a circle, which is a physical circle on the ground. So that's why you notice that there is a very clear difference, right? So that's tell you when do you want to make a circle? When do you want to make a circle markers, right? This is like a trivial, yet very, very interesting and very important difference between these two. Okay. So so yeah, this is pretty much it. The final parts I want to add to this map is that we want to add a click event. Basically, we want to see where did we click on. So this is how we do this. So first we need to add is a pop-up. So first we need to define a pop-up. Essentially it's an empty pop-up. It's in the limbos. They haven't added to anything, right? And the second they want to add is the function that once you click on anywhere on the maps, how do you want to add this pop-up? How do you want to manipulate this map, pop-up so that it can do something, right? So that's why I copy that, and we can see inside these functions, after you click on anywhere on the maps, and there is this event, we actually return your parameters called event. So inside this event, we actually contain these lat long informations that you can use it to set lat long to your pop-up, which is basically you move your pop-up to the position you click on, right? And then you're going to set the contents on this pop-up so that you can show something on the maps. And finally, you're going to open that directly on the maps. And the last part we're going to do is that we want to set these functions to this click event. So basically that tells we use the on functions of this map, which is the, remember, this is the very leaflet maps elements we have in the leaflet environment, right? So we tell these maps that on a user click on anywheres, you do this. That's basically in the natural language. Now we can see what it looks like, right? Let's save this. Let's go to the web page. Let's refresh that. Let's click on anywhere. You can see this is a like the contents are shown on here. So you click on the map at, which is the location you click on, right? If you click on anywhere else, it will actually change the value, which is because you click on different place, right? So yeah, this is pretty much like the only demonstrate a very simple and a very, I would say, comprehensive function like how Leaflet can do. So yes, this is like a working and a very, I would say, very simple yet very useful template you can work on and continue revising that. That's totally fine, right? Right. So next part we're going to do is we want to go back to our lectures and we continue our endeavors into the backend parts. So before we enter the backend lectures, I want to make sure everyone understand what is a backend, right? What is backend? So backend focus on server and infrastructures. So backend focus on database and the API that serve the data in the database. And in our case, that will be MongoDB and Python Eve. And before we enter the lecture, I want to make sure everyone have these functions ready. So this is a way trickier than the front end part. So make sure you make it work. And there is an instruction here. You want to see, you have very limited times until I start to the lab. So make sure you try it out. Okay. If you have any questions, we can either leave to the afterwards, or you can just speed up. Okay, we can figure it out. So why do we need a web map anyways, right? Why we need a backend anyways, right? We have our front end is ready. That's probably enough, right? And how can the backend support your research anyway? So for my case, as I study transportation, which need to be dealing with a lot of like a humongous amount of data, right? That's so easy to drag into like the swamp of a computations, right? So that's why I use a backend to manage my data. In essence, it scales well for large amount of data, right? And also, if you have a backend, which is a database compatible for different platforms, no matter you're using Python, you're using R, Node.js, web pages, or even like manually calculation, that's all right. I used to do that in manual calculation. So idea is that you want to store and manage everything inside a centralized place. It is easier to manage compared to separate files, and easier to use for different purposes, like scientific calculations, visualization. I think that's the reason we're here, because we want to make it more general. And because you guys, I believe you have different, very diverse backgrounds, that this can apply to different platforms, different subjects, different purposes. So that's why we want to build a backends, and we want to connect these parts so that we can do this in real times, and we want to make it more, I would say, ubiquitous, right? So we want to make it more general. And database, some backgrounds, of course, a lot of you maybe have like already noticed for a long time, is that there is several reasons to use a database. It is scalable, it is more organized, it is easier to read and write. This is more secure. So you don't have to have new files 1, 2, 3, or even have a 1, 1, 1, 2, 2. You know what I mean? So the idea is that you want to have more organized. The traditional example will be Postgres, PostGIS, MySQL, Microsoft Access. These are very traditional and very well-established domains, right? However, for our cases, I like MongoDB because it's called the so-called NoSQL. So why is so NoSQL, right? That's basically says it is not a SQL database because it is not relational. In essence, can you imagine a database that cannot do joins, right? So this is what we have here. MongoDB cannot do join. So you can now, but it is still not very common in terms of like how we do this, right? The only reason we use MongoDB, maybe not only, but the majority of the reason is that it is very flexible and it's very fast. We don't have to deal with the bureaucracies of the relational database, right? So all you need to do is basically CSV files, right? You basically organize that in a similar ways, and it's very flexible. And so that's why we say we need the API to host that, right? So do not let the API this name to intimate it, okay? So API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's nothing else but a running services that feed your data in your database to other applications, right? So other services can access data by an HTTP address, like URL, like for this one I have here is 127.0.0.1, which is like equivalent to localhost. And this is the port numbers, which is like, you can imagine different programs have a different channel to communicate information, right? And finally, we have a parameters here indicate which table I'm looking at, right? Because API is always feeding for one database, and one database can have a different collection, which is equivalent to the tables in the relational database, right? So API basically return data as a JSON or XML files. There is an example of the return records. So basically, we can actually see this later, is that the idea is that you want to feed the contents in your database to outside world and expose that for other people or yourself, but for different purposes to use that. And a lot of times it is very necessary. So this is what it looks like for the API structure. So we have a front-end parts and we have a back-end parts. Of course, these parts, these large like blue arrows, they can actually break down. You can't change the front end to other processes like you can even have it as like a sharing endnodes, which means you want to share your codes, share your data in your database to another person, right? On an institution. That's very nice to have. So in that sense, the RESTful API is very general, and is very flexible in that sense. But for our lab, we want to connect these front end, which is in our browsers, and the back end, which is in the database, and the API together to make it more coherent, right? So yeah, so that's this is a very short one. Let's go back to our instruction and VS Code to start. So what we want to do is first we want to populate the MongoDB database, and we want to reproduce the API and run it locally and connect to the backends and the front ends. This is basically what we want to do. We want to achieve the same performance as the ones we make in the front end parts, but every data will be fed from a database, right? Understand that? So is there any question about the backend lecture so far? If you know, we can just open up your VS Code, and then we are going to prepare your MongoDB campus. So MongoDB campus. To open that, it would take some time to prepare, but that's while we're like talking, we can just wait for that, okay? So let's go again, go for the two views. Let's go to the backend parts, okay? Okay, so before we go anything, there was another part that we haven't talked is how to go online. So while we are waiting for this, we can go to our GitHub desktops. Now notice that it now have 3 new files pop up in the change files. That's literally how we wrote it before in the front end parts, right? Before we go into the backend, we first need to make sure that these are correctly committed to the clouds, right? So to do that, we need to first is that remember we have to commit the changes to the Git, right? So in that sense, you need to write some notes, which is the summaries. In our case, it will be the front end part. You can actually write anything you like, as long as it's informative for you, okay? So after you write your information here, click on the commit to main. And it will do these things and commit to main. And notice that the changed files are gone because you actually committed files to your branch, which is the main branch. And now you notice that this button is changing, that says push origin. Basically, that tells you to push your changes to the clouds, right? Let's push that. Now, if you click on the histories, you can actually see here, this is just now, which is the changes we made in our front-end labs, that these changes has been applied to the clouds. Now, if you wait several minutes, let's wait it for the end of the class, that if you go to a web pages that you made, which is the places you place the index, you actually see your changes there. So this is actually a way to synchronize your changes to the clouds, which is a very nice feature to have, honestly. Now let's go to, okay, this is already done. So let's go to the campus. Okay, you should be seeing the same as my, if you haven't finished opening up, just tell me, okay, I can wait another times, several minutes.
Could you tell us how did you upload your code to our own GitHubs?
Yes, so basically you are looking at the same page as mine, right? Let's go to your desktop, which is the GitHub desktop.
Yep.
So you should be seeing the 3 files. I already do that. So you should be seeing the 3 files that we created in the front end part, right? Which is the index, main.js, and a style.css in the changes part. Do you see that?
No. So how did you get them? How did you actually get them there?
I want to make sure you clone the right repo, because maybe you're cloning my original repo. So let's do this, okay? Let's show.
I can figure it out later on. I don't want to hold the class up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, make sure you can stay later so we can discuss it. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any people have the same issue, by the way?
It tells me I don't have write privilege, so I forked it and then I was able to commit my changes.
Oh, okay. I think this is the issue is that you all some of you are cloning my original, which is here's, which is this which is the Louis Liu's ones, because this is not owned by you. So what you want to clone is your the ones you actually owns, which is like here's for, let's say Brian's, I cannot say Brian, but for Xiaohui, let's say this is one is actually the ones you want to clone. So so that's all right. This is definitely amenables. So one thing you want to do is that you want to clone this one instead to your GitHub. To do that, I can just quickly show you. So here's click on the clone repository. So you notice that this is actually my second account. This is very different from the Louis Liu account. This is a Louis GIS account. So in essence, it's like I'm cloning my own repos, not the Louis Liu's, right? So in your perspective, right? And one thing you can do is that you can click on this code buttons, is these blue buttons, and click on this copy, and you can go to the URL and click copy that, and then you choose your position as say let's clone that. It should be the same as the one I have here, but the idea is what you want to, like if you like here's the choose your own purposes, and this is like if you see the same message as the Xiaohui, you should be having this same issue, is that you're not cloning the right repos. But that's all right. Do not panic those. Make sure you save all your files. We can actually make it work later. Basically, what we do is I would copy these 3 files you already make in my repos to your repos, right? Right. So let's wait for the backend parts. That's because because go ahead.
Oh, I think the important step is that you just quickly select you want to contribute to your own clone. I think
okay.
you select that part, and that's what contributes to other people seeing the privilege arrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
right after you clone. Yeah, just to.
Yes, I get that. I think I showed that in the video, so that's all right. That's totally fine. So if you see that, we can figure it out later. Okay, because the backend part does not allow this does actually involve this online feature. So we can just continue our continue what is seeing here, and that's all right. Totally all right. So first, we want to do is that let's go to my instruction. Well, actually, you can stay with your pages. Okay. So first is that we want to copy your files you made it. In our case, you just want to copy the index.html and the main.js twice, and copy that. Click on Ctrl+C and directly press Ctrl+V's. And you can see here they have an index copy. The reason why I want to 2 things is that I do not want to subtouch your normal index.html, which will be already committed to your cloud. That will be like the things you see in the websites, right? I do not want to subtouch that process. So here is we want to change the names to something like backend. And here's change this one to the backend. So this is like the backend version, because the backend version will be the fundamentally different from the ones we use in the front end. Yeah, because essentially we're using 2 different data sources, right? Although we are seeing the same things, but they're different, right? So now what we want to do is that we want to close all of these. As long as you're saving, do not worry about it going anywhere. It's just to stay as these code things, right? So now let's open up the backend versions here's and here's, right? So let's go first open the index.backend HTMLs, because there is one thing we want to change, which is the files we want to hear. We're reciting here. So let's change it to backend .js. This is like the backend versions because we want to, citing the correct versions, right? Let's save that. And let's go to the backend open that. So this should be just for now. Okay, let's leave it for now. So once we finish that, we want to do is that we want to import UFO data in the MongoDB. So I believe a lot of you already have this page ready. So if you can directly click on the connect, you can connect to the local version of your MongoDB. In essence, this is the MongoDB you're seeing right now. So the MongoDB Compass is like the GUI, which is like a software we use to see the data inside the database, right? It's like just like if you know our PostGIS, it's like a PG admins, right? If you know what I mean. But anyway, it's like a structure we build to see what's inside and visualize the data in the simple ways. And also we can use this campus to kind of do some simple data manipulations, right? Like upload your data, which is what we're going to do, right? Now here's what we want to do is that we will click on the create database. So now as we show up these pages, we can name our database as UFO witness, okay? And then you have a collection name. So database versus collection is just like a database versus tables in other traditional like database, right? So now we have a collections. Let's call it, since it is happening 2018, so that will be 2018 03, which indicates its times, right? Let's keep it this way and create a database. All right. Should be okay any minutes. All right, so once it's finished, you should be seeing this. Let's click in this database. And again, it will see only one collection. You can actually create more if you have these demands. That depends on you, right? But for this one, we just concentrate on this one table or collections for now. So click into that, you will notice that yes, there was nothing because that's literally we just created that, right? So what we want to do is I want to upload our UFO witness data into this database to simulate this process of the backend processing, right? Because this process is kind of want to mimic the process that you're doing your scientific research, right? For example, like you doing, for me, is like translations, right? Like I do public translate research, I calculate in another platform like Python, so I calculate every result, and then I store my result into this database, right? So this is what I want to mimic that process. The only difference is that right now we're using a simple platform and our data is self-filled, but guess what? It's sufficient for demonstration purposes, right? So next we want to do is click on the add data and click on import files. So here you will notice that there is a select files, and click on the browse. And let's go to our folder, which is the folder of your folders you're looking at, right? So if you cannot find that, that's all right. Let's go to the folder you are looking at here, right? Which is here. And let's go to the data. It should be saying the two files, right? Let's use the JSON versions, right? To do this, you want to copy your link over here, press on Ctrl+C. Let's go back to the MongoDB campus. You will notice that you can do the same things, right? Let's copy the link is just copied and press enters, should be in the same, directly seeing the UFO.json, right? Let's select that. Let's click on open and select the JSON options. And wait for a minute if you have any questions so far, or you want to keep up. Anyone have issues working so far? Because I understand the backend part is kind of a tricky ones. So if you know, that's just click import. It will give you some times. It should be very fast because it's literally just the 200 records. It's very, very small compared to the actual data we're going to deal with in the actual scenarios. So here you can see there is a different entries that represent different witness of the UFOs in different places, right? Now we can see different, like the same data in different formats, right? Now here, this is the table format. This is like Excel's, but for our data sets, it has a more complicated data structure, which means within a single cell, it can even have more structures, right? Let's click on the this one to see what it looks like within, right? So it's like a rocky hues and a date and the geometries, like here's. So basically that's like what we see in the GeoJSONs, right? So now this is like pretty much it. We now have the data in our database, right? And next what we want to do is we want to build API, not necessarily build because we want to use API to serve the data, right? So to do that, let's go to our Visual Studios, right? Let's click on the sidebar, let's open that. Notice that we have an API folder let's open that. You'll notice that there is 3 Python code over there. So one thing we care about is, the only things we actually care about is run.py. So this is the Python code we're actually going to run. So notice that there is like several parameters here, so we want to change. So the first parameter is the database names we want to feed to the outside world, right? Not outside world, but other application inside your computer, because although we keep talking about the outside world, it is not actually this whole internet. So because you're not in the internet, right? You actually just inside this local host, which is just within your computers. Let's change it to UFO witness. Okay. And this should be okay. So next parameter will be the port number. We introduce the port number as different channels, different programs used to communicate, right? So as long as you choose a unique, not like a usual, not unusual numbers that not many like processes can use, like 80 or 8080, as long as you avoid these, you're okay, okay? So this is why I choose 13579. So this is not a usual number that a lot of processes use. You can keep this way. And let's save this. So the same, so this is actually, I do not want to go deep into how this work, because guys, believe it or not, I haven't touched this like since 2018, since I wrote this. And it is still working right now. And that's the purposes of this, like, the API is that I want to be context free. I want to be just working. And we do not want to really want to go deep into how it is working, because I think you don't have to, right? So right now, that's one thing we want to do is we want to open up the new consoles in the Windows, right? Let's right click on the start buttons and select Windows PowerShell. It should be any times. All right, there it is. So we want to run these run.py codes, right? So that's why we're going to right click on this banner over there, right click on that and choose copy path. So this will copy the place where this file is in, right? And here's we're going to run that. So to run that, this is pretty much like a Python's, right? Python is like a py plus and the control V's, right? Which is the path you just copy from the Visual Studios, right? Visual Studio codes, right? And press enter. Give some times. Okay, I didn't press that. Press that. All right, it should be saying the same message as mine. If you're seeing a different will, you can speak up, okay? So now we can see that it says running on HTTP 127.0.1.13579, which is the same number of point over there. So here, this is basically says, if you access these URLs, let's copy that, Control C, and go to our web browser. And if you press enter, you will see, okay, they actually have different tables, right? It should be containing all the table, but since our database just have one table or one collections, you just have ones, right? To see the data in this table, that's specify which table we want to see, right? In our case, it will be 2019, there was 3, right? Now it says, give some times, okay? So this is like what it looks like, right? So essentially it should be the same as the ones we have over there. So what we see here should be the exactly same. The only difference is that this one can be accessed by another process. This one just the ones we see in the database, right? It cannot be directly used. Okay, so after we get this running, let's go to an instruction, right? Is there any questions so far? Please speak up, okay? All right, so let's change the front end to incorporate the backend. Remember, we made a copy of the backend versions, right? So now this is what we want to do. Let's open the main backend.js. So now let's scroll down to the point where we actually get this data from. So notice that we need to change this URL, which is now we want to use our APIs, right? So now let's go to the here's and I copy this link over there and change it to local versions. Notice that this is by no means a GeoJSON files, right? Because it literally just return just like a random things, right? Just like it looks like this, right? In that sense, we need to find a process, or we need to find a new functions to transform the data as we retrieved from this place into something that GeoJSON can seem like a GeoJSON. In that sense, it can be directly used in these layers, right? So that's why we're going to copy these specific lines over there and copy theirs. In that sense, just the data equals format data, data. In that sense, just like transformations, right? A data transformations. So after you enter that, next part, you want to copy these functions over there and put it somewhere. Let's put that over there directly after that. But in that, anyway, that position does not affect your outcomes, I know. So let's save that. And let's forget about the why it's working. Let's see what happens, right? Let's go to our Webmaps, which is here. Notice that there is we're looking at the backend version. So you need to change it to backend, right? So notice that this is nothing popping up in terms of like orange. You see nothing orange here. That is totally normal. So notice that, remember that we talk about the CORS, right? We have CORS restrictions that it does not allow us to request data from another source, right? Other domains, right? So that's why this is where we need to resort to different solutions, which is the Firefox developer editions, right? As we talk in the lecture. So let's go to the code, which is where we wrote everything in. And here's, if you find index backend.htmls, let's right click on that and open with. Let's click on the Firefox Developer Edition. Okay, it should be given sometimes. Give it some time, so it should be okay. No, not updating right now. Okay, it is fast, thankfully. All right. Not now. So notice that it's still the same. That's all right. Because we haven't turned on this option yet. So we need to turn on this CORS everywhere plugin, which now if you click on that, it should become a green one. So let's refresh this wheel. Okay, there it is. So this is right now, this is actually the information we get from the database we have. So right now you should be using this. And let's go back to the function that I explained is finally why it's working, right? So basically what it does is that first it will return a data which is retrieved by the jQueries, right? Notice that it return the data, right? Return the data here, and then we feed the same data as the parameters here in these functions, right? So inside these functions, first what we need to do is we need to find out where the actual data is, right? In our sense, the API will actually like a container, just like an Amazon Prime, like a like deliveries, right? You always have like a container outside that data. In that sense, the actual data, which is your actual purchase will be actually here's in the items. So in these items, these are actually the JSON structures you are going to use. And because that is still a JSON, right? That's not GeoJSONs. And then we're going to add a tag, which is every GeoJSON have, which basically define its type, its names, its CRS, which is like, it's like the reference systems, right? And the features, basically these features is the actual feature we see on the grounds, right? On the maps, right? And after defining structures, we're going to define and assign these items, which is the data we return by the API to that. And finally, we return this GeoJSON, which is a legit function, a legit structure that can be viewed as the GeoJSONs, right? So now we can just insert this GeoJSON will be returned as a data and directly into these functions so that it can visualize their properties. That's the process. And there's a lot of application for this process. Now, for example, what if you have a real-time code that constantly changing your data, right? So right now what you have is that you have a real-time process that only thing you need to do is that just like click on the refresh and it will return a new data, right? That will be very, very nice to have, because imagine what if you're having like a dynamic process and this can be done like flawlessly, right? Now imagine what can you do for the traditional GIS softwares, right? You need to export your data from a database and then visualize that by XY, and then you need to have different version control issues that you need to manually do a lot of things, right? That is not efficient at all. So this one is particularly, I would say, the most useful features in our application, and I actually use a lot in my research, and I believe it is a very nice thing to have. That's why I'm sharing this knowledge with you. Okay. All right. So let's go back to see if there's any. So basically, this is the end of this class. There was no more contents in terms like the actual thing you need to do, but yeah. So in general, I want to conclude our labs over there is that I think it is very nice and a very convenient ways that although it seems like a hustle to build up this platform, but once you have these platforms, you basically do nothing, right? You basically just have to like do some maintenance work. That's compared to the job you need to manually do, like drag in the ArcGIS and complaining about the crashing issues. This is totally worth it. And if you have fundings, sometimes you want to make online versions, right? You can make it to promote your research results and product. I actually know some persons in climatologies and the hydrologies, and to make it like more make it better and make more people actually use this. And these have zero gatekeeping effects. Okay, anybody can use this, right? So that's pretty much it, right? And you feel free to use my template. Okay, I can actually share more results if you want to use that. And thank you so much for being here. I know this is Friday afternoon. I know this is not the best time to pay attention, but I appreciate your attention, right? If you have any questions, like brains, if you have any question issues, you can stay here and we can solve it out. But if you don't have any further issues, yeah, before we go, I want to ask everyone to do a poll, which is to test whether my teaching is effective or not, right? So let's do that. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can just ask me, right? When we are doing this, thank you so much for being here. I mean, it's means so much for me. Sorry about so many questions. So I know 11 questions, but I need that to like do some research. But yeah. Right. While we are doing this, if you have any question, feel free to ask me. You can share your screens so that we can figure out why it's not working. Or if you have any further questions, like a general question about my research, you will come to do so. Potential, collaborations. Then, wow, that's good, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It
Yeah. No
was,
worry.
yeah, it was amazing. Thank you, Liu.
Yeah.
Bye.
Don't worry.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Yeah, bye.
Okay, I'm going to end this polling. Well, thank you for being here. I think I will download the poll and end it. Right? Thank you.